Thanks, Anjali. It was indeed a very inspiring start to the session. Now, I would like to welcome all of you to a panel discussion on sustainability makes business sense. As industry leaders, we are equally responsible towards all our stakeholders, be it community, consumers, shareholders, amongst others. In this context, it is imperative to not only deliver consistent and profitable growth, but also do that responsibly. Sustainability today, however, it is not about just doing the right thing. It is what our consumers demand of us. It is what the talent of tomorrow seek from us. It is what makes full business and financial sense. It is therefore not about purpose at the cost of business, but rather driving business through purpose. And to take this line of thought forward, I would like to invite our distinguished panelist for the day. I invite our moderator for this panel session, Mr. Vinod Mahanta, Senior Editor, Economic Times. I invite our panel members, Mr. R. Mukundan, MD and CEO, Tata Chemicals Limited, Mr. Neeraj Akhoury, CEO, Holcim India, and MD and CEO, Ambuja Cements Limited, Ms. Anjali Bansal, President, Bombay Chambers, and founder, Avaana Capital, Ms. Anita George, Executive Vice President and Deputy Head of CDPQ Global. Once again, I welcome all of you. Over to you, Mr. Mahanta.
While Vinod joins us, I think the purpose of the discussion, this particular panel today, was to really think about not profit versus purpose, but the integration of profit and purpose, and how some of our leading businesses, Tata Chemicals and CDPQ, as of course as a financier, as well as Holcim, are thinking about integrating sustainability into their core business models themselves. We will give Vinod a minute and then start.
Can you hear me? Sorry for the glitch. Consistent with the times. Are we good to go?
Yes, we are good to go, Vinod.
Yeah. So we're in the middle of a black swan event, and if the pandemic has taught us anything, it's that every leader needs to think hard about survival and future-proofing their business. COVID has put both the growth drivers, globalization as well as capitalism, under the spotlight. The perpetually growing economy on which our financial system rests has now come into conflict with a planet that has limited resources. It's very clear that businesses now need to think beyond profits. And now the whole conflict with the planet has to be solved. It's very clear that this is the golden opportunity for businesses to think beyond profit. Today I have a great panel with me to discuss these issues, people who are making it happen in their companies. We have managements, we have board members, we have long-term investors. There's the right mix of people to get different point of views. So house rules, we'll just keep it a very open discussion. Everyone can come in on any questions. I will direct these questions to some of the panelists, but everyone can join it at any point of time. I think just as a start to open the discussion, uh, a good point would be to discuss what has really been happening in the last few years. I mean, I remember doing the first sustainability study for ET in 2012. It was all very fluffy. We had 2 pages in the annual report. Now I was going through the various annual reports of Tata Chemicals, Holcim, and also CDPQ. Remarkable change, remarkable improvement, and things have really gone to the next level. Sustainability and digitization are the two important things which I hear from CEOs all the time. So the question for all of the panelists is: has sustainability conversation moved beyond compliance? Do leaders now look at ESG as a competitive advantage? Mukundan, you can start from you.
Uh, Thank you, Vinod, and really want to thank Bombay Chamber for inviting me for such an important session. Absolutely delighted to be part of this conversation. And let me at the outset say that I come from a very fortunate bunch of people who joined a group whose purpose itself was improving quality of life for everybody. That put the planet, the people at the center of what we do. Coming from Tata Group, it was part of the core purpose, and there was never any doubt in our mind. But I just want to say that the conversations and the understanding of sustainability, the way the climate change events are impacting us, the way the whole issue of circularity, all these concepts are getting into focus, I think, fairly recently. We must admit that. And all of us are grappling with how to sort of make the shift and make the change. So, firstly, in my view, it starts with refining and defining your core purpose, that it's not in conflict with the goodness and working for the goodness of planet. The second one is, I would say, one needs to sort of have a mindset shift that wherever you are, wherever you are, whatever may be your point of starting point of the journey, it's after all a journey. I think that brings me to the third point, which I often say, that disclosure is not transparency. So finally, I think we need to get to a point from disclosure to being more, and transparency effectively then means you are talking about all the material issues, and and sort of are willing to sort of tell the story as it is. But along with that story as it is also an unfolding story, right? So you need to sort of say how you're trying to improve. I think that is really the journey we are on. But it's a journey which is challenging, which is exciting, and at the same time, it is a journey which must be done because it is a very just journey.
Sure. Anjali, we can start with you.
Sure. I think, Vinod, I spoke a little bit just before the panel as well, that today sustainability is not a choice. It is a requirement. And much like if I rewind 20 years ago, when we didn't actually know what digitization was, technology used to be something embedded some 2 or 3 levels below in the organization. We thought of it as more IT systems really than use of technology and digital. And today we cannot imagine a business, any business, whether it is manufacturing or consumer or financial services, without the use of digital as a horizontal that is embedded across the business system. Similarly, sustainability, today we have thought of ESG, we have thought of CSR, but it has not yet fully embedded. I think that time is, if not here already, coming soon. We heard about COP26, of course, and the goals that the world has set for itself, and certainly India has set for itself. You mentioned it, and Ritesh mentioned it earlier, that one of the reasons it's not optional is consumers are demanding better choices. So at the same price point, they would prefer to consume more responsibly. Of course, in countries like India, affordability is very important. Second is employees, particularly our young people, are far more conscious, and they'd rather go work for a company that they think is responsible and more sustainable than otherwise. And finally, and we have one big capital provider here, so I would love to hear from Anita, of course, but big capital has already made its moves. The famous letter by Larry Fink of BlackRock, a lot of actions by big pension funds, the big global institutional investors have spoken with a big stick, which is capital, and we have seen significant price movements in stocks of companies that are in hard to abate industries. And across the world, across the global economy, whether it is the UNPRI, it is the Task Force on Climate-Related Disclosure, a lot of collaborative action is taking place. So not optional, much required, whether it is in your R&D, product development, supply chains. We will, I know later on in the session today and tomorrow, we will speak about circularity and the use of renewable energy in a different way. So energy transition, waste management, water, all of these are very significant issues that impact every element of a business and indeed our lives as consumers, as employees, and as employers.
Anita, how do you, as a long-term investor, look at this, look at sustainability?
Thank you, Vinod. I hope you can hear me. Is it clear?
Very clearly, very clearly.
Okay, wonderful. So I represent CDPQ, which is Caisse des dépôts et placements du Québec. And as the title suggests, we are the pension fund managers of the province of Quebec in Canada, Canada's second largest pension fund manager. And I like to say, because I truly believe in it, that sustainability has been a part of CDPQ's DNA. We were founding members of the UN Principles of Responsible Investment, and ever since, that goes back to 2006, we have always said that it's not just good enough for us to make reliable returns for our pensioners, but we also have to contribute to the development, of course, of Quebec, but also of wherever we make investments. So that sort of dual hat and role has influenced the way CDPQ makes investments with a long-term perspective. I think the very fact that we are long-term also puts in perspective risks as well as returns. And therefore, the approach has always been one of focusing on sustainability. In fact, the ESG screens are part and parcel of our investment process. And very often we've turned down investment opportunities, even profitable ones, because we feel that the other aspects, the sustainability aspects, are not being met or will not be able to be met. So that focus and approach, I think, is one which CDPQ has had. But the big change, Vinod, that we see is a role of stewardship, of bringing along others to also join forces with us. Today, we have initiated, we are co-founders of the Investor Leadership Network, which is a group of 14 of us institutional investors, insurance companies and pension funds, with $9 trillion US under management. And what we are doing is really agreeing among ourselves that we'll have collective focus on climate change and biodiversity, diversity, equity, and inclusiveness, as well as governance. And what this means is that when $9 trillion jointly get together, so for example, we've already come out with a policy that for all listed companies that are not following, firstly, don't have a sustainability plan, or end up not following that plan, not delivering on the metrics put forward, this collective of investors actually have the right to vote out board directors or management, etc. So there is teeth, both positive incentives and disincentives. The last thing I would say is the focus, of course, because of the extreme climate events as well as COP26, as Anjali mentioned, there is a big focus on environment. I would say a little less on biodiversity, but that is also gaining traction. There has always been focus on governance and transparency. However, now what I see is a big push towards recognizing that the S is very important. It's more difficult probably to quantify, but I see a lot of effort towards having common metrics and comparability between investment opportunities, also with regard to the S. I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you. Sustainability, the way it was run over the last few years, was it was a very piecemeal effort. But whenever I was going through the annual reports, I mean, one of the things you which comes out at you is basically how it's been aligned with the company strategy, especially the Tata Chemicals annual report. I mean, beautiful illustration of how the process is actually built into the strategy. How have you gone about basically aligning both strategy and ESG, Mukund?
So I think fundamentally, Vinod, it starts, as I said, with the purpose, and from purpose, it also there are two bookends to this. One is purpose and values, and I think strategy sits in between. So if your purpose and values are aligned, I think the strategy will automatically flow in that direction. But going back to specifics, I think if you want me to break it down to granular level, I think when we started, for example, on the climate change journey, uh, the group is large, the companies are large. So what we had decided was to get external help. Firstly to put out where we stand as a baseline. What is our starting point? It's very important to define the starting point accurately or as well as possible. The second piece was to train a lot of our young talent and the leadership on to be climate change champions. So we had a proper program, training program, exposure on all these elements. And finally, I think we rolled this out with exposure to all people, got the commitment, and we sort of moved forward with specific targets, which are first easy to understand. Now, when I say easy to understand, for example, if we are an engineering firm, engineers understand energy consumption. So we didn't start with carbon as a number. We said, let's cut down on energy. So it's easy to sort of then move forward. From there on, we started to add layers of inputs on that. But I would broadly say, in terms of sustainability, there are three pillars which we sort of look at now, very, very focused manner. And I'm going to talk about the sustainability not from S and G angle, but I'm just going to see the focus on the E angle. And I think the three broad pillars are around climate change. Second one is circularity, and third one fundamentally is around biodiversity. We measure them. For example, we have defined for ourselves in biodiversity, life beneath water is what we will impact, because that's something which not many companies focus. If you look at our company's profits, a lot of it comes from the sea. So we said we will focus on life beneath water, and a lot of efforts which we do. It doesn't mean we don't do anything on terrestrial land, but we do a lot of things like whale shark projects and these projects to make sure the biodiversity of the seas is protected. Mangroves, coral reefs, these are things which we work on. Now, getting down to these three pillars, as I mentioned, fundamentally around the circularity, climate change, and biodiversity, we have specific metrics which we started to track, and some of them we made external commitments. The first one we made external commitment was science-based targets, where I think broadly we have to reduce by 2030 about 38% gross emissions which we have today, even as the company grows. So it's a journey we need to do, and engineers have worked out how to sort of do this. There's a bridge fuel called natural gas which we need to switch into before we go into hydrogen. So there's a pathway which has been laid out. Net zero, our teams are still working, but we know the ultimate target is about 2050. But we want to be looking at, can we get there before 2050, before we make a public announcement. So we have not made clearly the public announcement on that, but it is coming soon. Now, in terms of the issues which you need to tackle on this journey, and I think Anjali has pointed out, Anita has pointed out, the first piece you need to tackle is your consumers. You need to line them up, otherwise it doesn't work. The second thing you need to line up is the ecosystem. You are not in this alone. You need to get your peer groups within the industry. You need to get your suppliers, and it's a journey to walk along with them and work with them. Then you've got to work with government on regulatory frameworks. Sometimes they don't come, but I think you need to keep at it in terms of working with governments in terms of getting regulatory framework. And lastly, I would say fundamentally it boils down to the impact which you can create on your extended supply chain, which will the sort of then sort of feeds into you, so that overall you create an impact. So it starts with consumer, it goes through the value chain. You've got to work with the ecosystem, and then there's a regulatory framework. When all this happens, I think the work begins to move forward in the right direction. The good news is the work which many of the companies have done in the last 10 years, the needle has begun to move and has begun to move faster. I think time has come for us to sort of start measuring the results, and also time has come for us to focus on transparency, not just disclosure going forward. I go back to my opening statement. Yeah. Thank you.
Sure. So one of the things is basically, apart from management, we also need to have the board and the investors basically locked into this whole sustainability movement. So Anjali, the question for you is, how involved are the boards right now? Is it just basically looking at the reports, or you're also looking at driving sustainability in a company? Has it come to that stage yet? Anita, we can go to you. Can
I think Anjali is back. Anjali, do you want to go ahead? Okay.
Anjali, the question for you was basically, how engaged are the boards with the company's sustainability initiatives? How closely do you track it? How closely do you help in driving it? Anita, if we can,
Maybe Anita, you can go.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes,
in
I'll
terms
do
of,
that for sure.
as a
Yes.
Sorry, I
as a
didn't
long-term
catch
investor.
that. I just had a very poor connection. Yeah.
Sorry. So the question was basically both to Anita and you, that in terms of board and in terms of in long-term investors, how do you drive sustainability? I mean, how do you interact with management? How do you? So Anita, you can go for it.
So I think for us, it's very important that at all three levels, shareholders, boards, as well as management, and then below as well at the working levels, heads of departments and divisions are also very key in terms of how sustainability gets integrated into operations. And therefore, when we do look at governance structures, that is something that has been very important. And I do see a positive change. If you look at the Fortune 1000 companies, as you may have heard during COP26, the IFRS's subsidiary, the Sustainability Standards Board, has come out with metrics on measuring ESG factors. And so there is now a common language, a common yardstick by which companies can follow and be compared to each other. And as Mr. Mukundan mentioned, I think that's really the start, but that's not good enough. It's very much the beginning. So one of the things as capital providers that we are doing is to really hold boards accountable. So I see a lot of that coming into play in the public listed companies, yet to come into private companies. However, I know as a limited partner to private equity funds, we have started the dialogue and discussion on how do we also as LPs have influence in terms of how private company boards are behaving. And I think there's also an interplay with regulation, as Mukundan mentioned, where the regulatory requirements like diversity on boards, for example, and India is a great example where that has come out as part of the Companies Act. And therefore, you see that there are more women on boards, more diversity on boards, and that contributes towards the way in which companies evolve their strategies, implement, execute, etc. One small example I would say is really incentivizing people throughout the company. So again, while we are focusing on shareholders, board and management, I think to have the true integration, incentivization is important. And one thing that CDPQ did ourselves is to connect our variable pay for every investment staff to the targets, to the performance against targets we've set ourselves on sustainability, whether it is emission related, diversity related, governance related. And that has had a big impact in terms of aligning the entire institution towards achieving those goals.
Sure. One small announcement. People can send in their questions, which I will then put forward to the panelists. Neeraj has joined us.
Good
Welcome,
afternoon.
Neeraj.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm
Yeah.
so apologize
So,
for apologies, guys.
so the question for you is basically profit or purpose need not be a choice, and it can and these both can work together in service of all stakeholders. But it's a difficult path to walk on. How are you balancing both? I mean, both Mukund and Neeraj can answer this. Neeraj, you can start.
I think this debate of profit versus purpose for our industry, we know, is not very relevant today. And I say this with the conviction that today what is good for business is also good for environment, the kind of initiatives that we are talking about. So when we talk about uh, changing our factory power needs from grid power to wasted recovery, it is good for the business in the sense that power cost comes down, as well as is good for the environment. When we talk about green products in the market, we it's good for the environment. It's more it's less carbon intensive, but at the same time, is also good for the in terms of the construction quality. When we use biodiesel in our ships, again, it is good for the environment, good for the business. So currently, I think the phase that we are in, it is more about capital infusion in the business, through which you create, you bring those technologies that change the way you produce, the way you transport, the way you build, in terms of from limestone up to concrete. But the trade-off between environment and business is not required at this moment. Having said that, as we move forward, Vinod, we will now be faced with some of the tough choices, and those choices will be where we will have to take a clear view, whether we will go for good for environment steps or good for business steps. Having way we look at it at Holcim India and with our two companies, ACC and Ambuja, um, half of what reduction targets that we have taken are where the balance is perfect. That is, it's good for business and good for environment. But the second half, in topics like carbon capture, these are topics where we really need to understand the whole economics of this business. Yeah, that will you be able to fund those businesses and make it run in a viable way once you go into carbon capture? But the way technology is evolving, the way new thinkings are coming in our business, I have a sense that we will have several other alternatives which will allow us to do good for the business as well as good for the environment and good for the environment. Yeah, that will be my view on this. Vinod. Yeah.
Vinod, we cannot hear you.
Okay. Okay. So somebody was saying they are not really able to hear me. So.
No, we can hear you, Neeraj. I think Vinod.
Mm.
think we can't hear Vinod. Let me ask a question on behalf of Vinod while we get sound back for
Yeah,
him. Vinod, on your
keep it
behalf.
going, Anjali. I think it's good. Yeah, let's do
Let's
that.
keep going, yes. So are customers ready to pay the sustainability premium? I think we've all talked about how it is important to get the consumer aligned. And whether your customer is a business customer or a consumer, is this something that all of us are just thinking about in terms of business models, or will people actually pay for this?
So I think
So,
Neeraj can go
I'll turn it over
B2C.
to Neeraj.
Let me start with B2B business so that
yeah.
he can go B2C later on because he does sell to a lot of consumers. So in terms of B2B, Anjali, I think it's already started to make a shift. It is no longer that they're willing to pay more. In some of the customers, it is the license to get it. So some of our large customers in FMCG space have started to sort of push us in terms of, for example, sustainable, let's say, extractive industry practices. They want sustainable energy numbers to be put in place in terms of targets to be achieved because their final retail chains are driving them. So it is almost like a chain which is sort of pushing back on this. And we have, with our customers, developed sustainability codes for many of the practices, including transportation, packaging. So we've worked with them to sort of develop these codes, which then can go out and they can implement with other suppliers of theirs. So as an industry, I think, which is why when I mentioned ecosystem needs to work together as one engine is very important. But it always starts with consumer and consumer pressure, and that builds up. So as far as we've seen, I would say the way one must measure the premium is the stickiness of your B2B buyer. They stick with you because you do what is right. Of course, you have to devise solutions which don't have too much of a cost penalty on this transition. I think that's what engineers do. That's what we do as a company. Of course, there is never an easy solution, and this is a bridge you need to cross together.
Right. No, great point. It's a bridge to be crossed together. So how do you make, in some ways, and some of these are very finance type decisions, right?
So
So,
Neeraj will answer the difficult
so,
part.
Yeah.
so
So,
hence we turn it over to Neeraj. Neeraj, CapEx, how do you think about that?
yeah. So, no, I just want to answer what Mukundan, what you said, but let me give you my perspective. In the beginning of this year, we have a global product called Eco Pact, which is a concrete product for B2B customers. And I was absolutely convinced that this will not sell because B2B is more of a L1 kind of a ecosystem where how do you sell something which is just green, and it has been the fastest growing product for our portfolio today. Yeah, it's growing at about 25%. And remember, it's a B2B product. Yeah. Similarly, we went into B2C with a product called Kavach and ACC Gold, again the fastest growing product. Now, the trick is you can't sell a product merely by saying green. You have to back it up with some more tangible benefits where customers can see value not only in the part called green but also in some other parts. So what I have, my experience in last 11 12 months is if there is a parity in terms of product quality, and in one product, in addition to that product parity, there is something called green, it sells. And sells in B2B, it sells in B2C as well, both in cement as a bag and as well concrete. So that was my first part. But second part, the question, Anjali, which you're asking is a good question. In fact, now when we present capex, and we are doing a fairly large capex, about $500 million in east part of India. The questions earlier were more about finance, more about your paybacks, and more about your returns. But I'm finding increasingly the board at the local level as well as the group level, at the global level, is now asking for a very clear route on how does this project help us to achieve our net zero ambition. And if you, and to give an example, Anjali, one of the things that we do, and Mukundan will tell you, is to build a captive coal-based power plant in all the units, because the cost of power is lower than the grid power. Now, that's a strict no these days. You can't. Even so, there's a straight economic benefit, but because it has a bigger impact on the environment, it is a strict no. But you can do solar, you can do wind, you can do waste recovery, but you can't do a small coal-based captive power plant. So we are seeing this shift for last couple of years of what you can do or what you cannot do. And that is becoming much more pronounced, I would say, in 2021, where some very strict rules have been applied. And I'm not only talking about Ambuja and ACC. I think I will speak about from the industry as well, that some of these projects are now being redefined, be it in terms of technology, be it in terms of the kind of equipments we use, be it in terms of kind of products which we make. I see a general shift happening, but for Ambuja and ACC there is a significant shift. So, but again, Anjali, go back to my last answer that till now we are dealing with what is good for environment is good for business. I hope to see that when we come to the second part, when it is not, when it has a direct, a large, significant adverse impact on your projects, so payback from 8 years moves to 15 years, we will have to figure out how do we create that environment in which investors, boards, management, all of us are equally committed that yes, 15 years is a better thing to do in terms of a long-term plant than to do something for 8 years, which is environment, which is damaging. Because we are also convinced that sometime in the coming years, regulators and civil society, NGOs, consumer groups, investors, all of them will force us not to use those kind of equipment. It will be a wrong investment, even though today it looks good, but it will be a wrong investment for the long run.
Yeah, Anjali, just to add a point, I will not go in the direction of capital approval. We've tried many mechanisms, put a price on carbon. Then we reached the conclusion, which exactly what Neeraj mentioned, no for certain kind of, let's say, fuel mix. So all that is, one of the things we need to start thinking ahead is to start to think in terms of groups of sectors working together. It's not even companies. For example, if cement and steel and glass have to deliver, then the entire construction industry needs to work together. The realty industry needs to work together, because there's an inbuilt carbon in every building. So we need to go to that kind of detailing. So that conversation has just begun now. So when I said it's a transition period, first it started with companies, then it became within the sector. Now we are saying there was a cross-sectoral impact. So you need to bring steel, cement, and glass, and once glass comes in, our chemical sector will come in. So I think we need to sort of think through this not in just one constrained manner, but in a much wider sense.
And in some ways, really, and Vinod is back, so I'll turn it over to him. This is where technology comes in. And we, for example, what I do at Avaana, we are very bullish that technology actually will provide many of these solutions. Very simple things like the cost of sensors has, Moore's law has finally hit in the sustainability sector. And the cost of sensors has crashed. So you can actually put IoT and sensors into every device. You can put it into farms, even Indian smallholder farms, and make them more productive and effective. A new unit of solar now finally costs less than a new unit of thermal. Neeraj, point taken. But really what you can do with electrifying off-grid, microgrid through solar, we couldn't have done 10 years ago. So many more things are going to be possible. We may not know them today, but as new technology develops, and these cluster-based approaches come through, then I am hoping that we will actually see a lot of innovation and solutioning that will come through, whether it is in food systems and agriculture, supply chains, manufacturing, and mobility, of course, as well as energy transition. Vinod, over to you, please.
I think Vinod still has a problem, Anjali. We may have to carry on. He's not able to unmute himself.
We will have Vinod kind of conduct the next session then, which he's also an expert on. So let me move then, and I'm just reading off Vinod's queuing to me, so all credit to him. Governments thus far seem to have largely paid lip service to corporate sustainability initiatives till now, but that seems to be changing. What more should governments do to attract more aggressive corporate commitments towards sustainability? So, what is the role, an active role of policy, enabling active role of policy and governments? And I'll request actually Anita, Neeraj, and Mukund to please speak in that order. Anita, you have a fairly global view on what you are seeing governments across the world do.
So clearly, I think COP26 was a good demonstration of different efforts by different governments, including India. We finally did come out with a net zero commitment by 2070 and transition goals and targets, and we upped our renewable energy target to 500 gigawatts. So I think from a government regulatory point of view, there has been positive changes, and also the enforcement of regulation. And if we look at, for example, again coming back to India, the EPR guidelines and the enforcement of EPR definitely is moving in the right direction, with penalties becoming more and more significant, which then motivates industry to comply. And I would say globally, that is also the trend that we are seeing, that there are regulations coming into place, but also enforcement of regulation has become much more explicit. And just going back to your previous question on demand, as a financial institution, for example, our pensioners as well as the younger generation are demanding that they want to know where our investments are going. So there's also the pressure. I think it's a confluence of regulation, public push from the citizenry, as well as industry itself realizing, just as Neeraj mentioned, that this is something which is going to take place, so you might as well take the bull by the horns and act proactively.
I think you're right, Anita. My two bits on this, Anjali. I feel it's not fair to say that government has paid lip service. I mean, end of the day, the fact is that today the unit cost of solar energy in India is one of the cheapest in the world, and that would not have been possible without the backing of the government, or even the mission of creating this 450 gigawatts of solar power by 2030. There has been I think last several years, I do believe there is an enabling environment which is forming. Having said that, there are areas where some more attention required, and one of the key topics which is there is what kind of policy we should have. To the simple topic like who pays for the pollution? Does the polluter pay, or somebody else pays? So it's a very basic question, and I think it's not a simple. There's no simple answer to this question. We burn a lot of waste in our kilns, be it urban waste, or be it plastics, or sometimes even discarded noodles of Maggie, which normally goes to in our kilns. Yeah, but who pays for that? So this is a big topic. Alternate fuel will make sense. It makes sense today, but the kind of investment R&D that is required, at some point it will have to remain little better than the fossil fuels. Today it is, but this is the kind of investment that we require to consume more of alternate fuel. Government priorities will have to change in terms of the policy on who pays for the waste, and that's the way I think. But overall, I believe the way I am seeing in last 5 years that government has been quite supportive of and quite intense in pushing us to adopt new ways of production, at least.
So let me add my two bits to what Neeraj has already said and Anita has alluded to. And I think at a broader level, Anjali, we need to think this in terms of the what what other countries are negotiating with each other. So that's a different battlefield. So it'll appear like some people are going slow, some people are going fast, but the question there is of climate justice. So I think fundamentally there is an argument out there, and you can question whether $100 billion, whatever number is being thrown around, which is the transition number which you need for countries which have actually not occupied and squatted on the carbon space, and they need to get as a compensation for their investment. These are matter of multilateral negotiations which will happen. So if you leave that aside, I can only tell you that my understanding of whether you talk about India or China or you talk about even US, were driven by states. I mean, whatever may be the position of the federal government, I think every part of the world has made terrific moves. I think it's a move for the positive. Now, of course, when you put all those numbers and agglomerate them, you can come and say, listen, it doesn't take us to 1.5 degree, it takes us to 2.4 or 2.5, but the progress is on, exactly as what Neeraj just said. One of the things which has changed the last 5 years is the fact that there's a recognition, increasing recognition of policymakers that business cannot be sitting outside the tent. When all these discussions are going on, business must be coming inside the tent. So they've allowed for a sliver of businesses, a space for businesses to get into these negotiations, but still we are not in there. So I think that's an issue. The businesses pressure points are coming from consumers and also from within the competition from the capital providers. And I think at some point all these will converge, in my view. So, as in any big shift and big change, I think this will happen. The challenge we have in India is not the companies who are today in the panel today. I think the challenge we have is how do we help our medium and small scale industries to sort of transition. I think that's the bigger challenge we need to build, because as I said, it's finally the ecosystem which needs to work. Big companies will figure out a way how to sort of move this, sort of push cost around, and sort of may stays, find the innovative ways to absorb technology. But how do we sort of build that ecosystem and that confidence? And for that, in my view, I think every small experiment needs to get encouraged. Every small cluster where the shift is happening must be, we need to make stories out of them to spread those positive stories so that people can learn from each other. So in a sense, I think completely agree that if you look at the power sector, certainly renewable energy, there's been a big shift which has happened. But if you look at our power sector, if you look at our state electricity boards, till you reform them, you really are not going to reform the entire power sector to move in certain direction. So a lot of work needs to get done, but at least now the voice is getting shriller and slightly louder, and I'm sure policymakers are taking note of it.
No, and I actually agree with everything that's been said. There is a openness and an engagement to dialogue with industry and governments. And certainly, the Indian government is now putting a lot of emphasis on the green frontier, as it were, and recognizing that for India, the trade-off between people, planet, and profit is not a simple one. While we may be the third largest emitter, we still are on the path to larger sort of development and prosperity. So that is not as easy a trade-off here. And yet, I think across policy, industry, and civil society, there is a remarkable coming together and dialogue of how to make it happen in a more sustainable way. So I'm going to shift a little bit. Vinod, I don't know if you are off mute. But I must give full credit to all of this for Vinod, because I'm just following his outline and questions, which he has been kind enough to share. Anita, we're going to put you on the spot a little bit here. As one of the large investors, investors carry a lot of weight, both in terms of how they allocate capital, as well as their boardroom presence. And all of us sit on various boards as well. When we make some of these difficult trade-offs, right? So Neeraj mentioned that I think the rubber will really hit the road when there is a trade-off to be made between an 80-year payoff and a 15-year payback period. How do you as investors, CDPQ, Anita, and in your community of the large investors. How do you see these trade-offs? Are you willing to accept longer payback periods, for example? And I'm just using that as an example.
So Anjali, I think, depending on the time horizon that you use, the trade-off is really, I am a great believer based on experience that net zero is net positive. And I think the sooner industry comes to terms with that, the better it's going to be for everybody, because these trade-offs that we are talking about are really short-term and are also not looking at returns on a risk-adjusted basis. If you are truly to internalize the externalities that exist from a sustainability point of view, I think the trade-off discussion will practically disappear. So that's one point which I feel very strongly about. And when you look back at the experience of companies that have done this versus companies that haven't, the outcome is pretty clear. And I think especially, I would say, both for the chemical industry and the cement industry, this is a challenge which hopefully the industry will take these challenges on board from a longer term perspective. The second is, I think, things like carbon pricing. Even though we all dance around this topic, sooner or later this is going to become mainstreamed. And when that happens, again, the trade-off question is going to be different. The way I see this is that we might as well begin now, when you can shape and control things, rather than waiting for those big changes to happen and then having to play a catch-up game. The last thing I'd say is institutions like the big hedge funds and asset managers have been conducting for the past 15, 20 years comparative analysis of portfolios that are quote unquote sustainable companies and green versus those that are a blend of all kinds of companies. And clearly the performance of those sustainable companies has been better than the blend of companies. So I think in a way, we see what we want to see, but from the evidence and from the fact that you have $42 trillion now saying that that is the kind of investment we are looking for, the time is now. I don't think we can hide behind the trade-off argument.
That's very encouraging indeed. And I am conscious of time, but I do want to address the point Mukundan made on MSMEs. And MSMEs are such a large part of the Indian economy and the Indian market. And perhaps address it, at least the way we see it, is from a slightly different lens of technology, and which is digitization. With digitization across supply chains, particularly in the MSME space. And I think India in some ways has innovated more than any other country in the world with our public digital infrastructure of UPI and now, of course, building even more rails, whether it is an ONDC or a health stack and so on. I think it is there is an element of the mitigation, adaptation, resilience, and particularly resilience and efficiencies that will come through that when supply chains get digitized. So we hope to see that through various policy initiatives as well as financing initiatives, that MSMEs start to adopt technology, digitize, and thus move forward on that sustainability journey. And particularly as they come into supply chains, right, both upstream and downstream for large companies, Tata Chemicals, Holcim, large consumer companies, all their distributors and suppliers are all MSMEs. So if they become part of these sustainable supply chains, that change can start happening sooner rather than later. One last point, and then actually I'm going to turn over for closing comments to all our panelists here. We have talked about sustainability as almost sort of a need to do it. What about sustainability and sustainable business models actually becoming a source of competitive advantage? Not a cess, but an advantage.
I think, Anjali, that's absolutely what it is. And there is all kinds of modeling and calculations on net zero and the impact on the economy. And what we're seeing from different independent sources is that it is an opportunity. And I share with you the experience of both CDPQ and IFC, two institutions that I've worked in. And as financiers, we always say, the more conditions we put, the less competitive we become. But actually, again, I think what has happened is that something which started as a few of us, few voices who were demanding these changes, now it's become really a collective call from capital. So I see that trend in industry. I see that trend, of course, with governments and regulations. But most important, I think it's going to be consumers and the retail investor who's going to turn around and force us. And when you look at the Gen Z and the younger population, it's even more so. I mean, if we all of us talk to our kids, we get the answer pretty unequivocally that that is what they want to see. And I think the urgency will also come from the extreme events, weather events that we are seeing, which is now not just happening in some remote part of the world, but in every part of the world. Secondly, also the social fabric, where voices of those who do not have, who are not mainstreamed, are also becoming louder. And thanks to social media and digital access, resounding in the boardrooms and decision-making arena. So I think all of this is going to confluence to show that really this is an opportunity. And that's one reason, Mukundan, I would say that for India, instead of us crying about, we weren't the one who caused the problem, it's the West, etc., I think we should really use this opportunity to become leaders in sustainability and to use the technology advantage, the software advantage that India has to really exceed and excel. And that's what China is trying to do. And I feel that India has a real comparative advantage in this area. And that's the opportunity for us.
Thank you, Anita. Neeraj, Mukundan.
I think what the guy has said was is very right perspective. To answer your question from us, Anjali, the fact that the conversation has now moved beyond compliance. Yeah, this happened for last few years that every important players, the long-term players, the players who see this to be in this industries for a very long period, they are slowly transforming, and we include ourselves this into kind of a competitive advantage. So as I said, when we talk about energy and power, it is something that is clearly coming from being to create that competitive advantage in this. What we should realize that what sustainability focus also offers for the industry is a level playing field. So once we all are with the same objective, then the playground becomes better for all of us. But what is important and I think I'll keep on repeating this, that the economics of the ESG practice is now becoming clearer, and it is for any long-term player not to follow this path is self-destructive. So we do know the product that we make today, we cannot make 10 years from now. The way we build products today, we cannot build it 10 years from now. The way we mine today, we can't do it 10 years from now. So I think it is an opportunity that many of us are seeing, that by being high in the rankings of sustainability, there is a definite advantage that the company gets. To give you an example, Anjali, Ambuja is, 8 times water positive. When we started this journey, when this journey was more about that we should become water positive. When did it become from we should become water positive to becoming 8 times water positive, and now we're talking about becoming 15 times water positive? It is not because of any regulation or thing. It is an ambition that comes up when you start seeing the fruits of your effort, the fruits of what you have done in being expressed in the investor's mind, in the government mind, in the consumer's mind. Then it gives you that courage to go and do some more things. When last year when we did biodiesel, it was the first one to apply this in the ships. But the advantages of using biodiesel in a 6 months period was absolutely clear to us that this is the long-term business that the model that we can create. So I'm in absolute agreement with this, Anjali, that ESG sustainability is something that we should use, and we are using as for creating that competitive advantage, long-term competitive advantage, and not just for compliance. Yeah.
Thank you. Last word from Mukundan.
No, not the last one. I fully agree with what has been said. If you go by the real, we've got operations in US and in UK and in India and in Africa. But I want to say that just staying with water, which Neeraj mentioned, the net water positivity is highest in Indian operation. And it's not that we made some extra effort here or it's cost us more. We actually run more profitable operation in India than in other locations.
Yeah.
So it is not impacting the bottom line. And clearly, I think if you speak to anyone from Europe, it's a broad theme with which they will come at it is to say that, listen, we lost the battle of digital to US. We want to win the battle of sustainability with US. So I think that's the way Europe is going. But India has a big advantage, as Anita has said. India is yet to be built, and we can build it better. We can build it more sustainable, and that will create all the difference. The problem with our next door neighbor is they are undoing what they did. We don't have to do what they did so that we build better. So I think it's a great opportunity. I fully agree. And the technologies exist. If you just take business is all about power. In 10 years' time, hydrogen will be a real option. Maybe in 15 years' time, it is coming. It is coming fast. India will still have a lot to build beyond even 15 years. SMRs, if you look at it, they are a real possibility today. If you look at new energy, which is farmed out this SMR, GE, Hitachi, they're coming out with 100, 200 megawatt plant, which have no pollution at all. Of course, you then have to have this battle of nuclear versus non-nuclear. So there are alternates which are really which are nil carbon in the world, and those options are becoming clear. And as these technologies emerge, I think the pathway for India will be very much positive. The intent of the government is in the right place, and industry, at least the companies which are leading now, are also working with rest of the industry to sort of make sure that everybody works on the same path going forward. Business leaders have understood that this is the way the game will be in the future. The boards are aligned, the capital markets are aligned. I think the way forward is only going to be more and more positive for sustainability, and maybe we'll not need these sort of conferences. We may have to switch to some different topic very soon as the adoption is mainstreaming itself.
Very well said. I remember maybe 10, 15 years ago, we used to have similar summits on digitization. We no longer think about conversations, it's a given. So maybe sustainability will be a given even faster. And on that note, thank you so very much to Anita, to Neeraj, to Mukundan for joining us this evening. On behalf of Bombay Chamber, I want to extend a heartfelt gratitude to Vinod, the moderator, for this session, and for all the background prep that enabled us to really have this very exciting, very interactive discussion. So thank you all very much.